Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered why the most successful people talk more about their failures than their wins? It's not because they enjoy the pain, though let's be honest, some of them might be a little too enthusiastic about their breakdowns. It's because inside every failure hides a success blueprint so precise, so quietly powerful that most people miss it entirely. What if the moments that shattered your confidence were actually trying to shape your path? Imagine if the rejection that made you doubt your worth was the very signal pointing you toward your breakthrough. But here's the twist: these patterns don't scream, they whisper, and only those who learn to listen survive the storm with wisdom sharp enough to win. Today, we're not just going to look at failure, we're going to dissect it, challenge it, even laugh at it, and in doing so, uncover the very formula that no one's talking about. By the end of this, you won't just see your past differently, you'll walk out equipped to turn your next failure into the greatest opportunity no one saw coming. Failure is feedback, not a full stop. This idea, though simple in appearance, holds the power to transform the way we approach life, work, relationships, and even ourselves. From childhood, most of us are conditioned to fear failure. We are taught to see it as something to be avoided, something shameful, something that defines us in the worst possible way. A failed exam, a lost job, a broken relationship, each of these events is often met with disappointment, frustration, and self-doubt. But what if we've been looking at failure through the wrong lens all along? What if failure isn't a verdict, but a conversation? What if it's not the end of the road, but simply a detour sign pointing us toward a better path? When we start to look at failure as feedback, everything begins to shift. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" we begin to ask, "What is this trying to teach me?" That one shift in perspective moves us from being victims of circumstance to being students of experience. And the most successful people in the world, those who rise above the noise and leave a mark, are not the ones who avoided failure. They're the ones who listened closely to it. They treated every loss, every setback, every rejection not as a judgment, but as a clue. A clue about what didn't work. A clue about what needed to change. A clue about who they were becoming. Think about a baby learning to walk. They stumble, they fall, they crash into furniture, and yet we never say, "Well, maybe walking's just not for them." We cheer them on, we laugh, we encourage them to try again, because we understand that falling is part of learning to walk. So why do we forget that as adults? Why do we treat our stumbles as evidence that we weren't meant to succeed? It's absurd when you really think about it. We expect perfection from ourselves without remembering that mastery is always born from mistakes. It's like trying to build a house and being mad that the blueprints don't make a livable space. You're not supposed to live in the blueprint, you're supposed to build from it. Failure is that blueprint. Messy, confusing, often incomplete, but essential. In the business world, feedback loops are a critical part of innovation. Tech companies release beta versions of products not because they're perfect, but because they want the feedback. They want the failures to reveal where things break so they can make them stronger. Now, what if we approached our lives the same way? What if every failed conversation with a friend, every failed pitch, every failed attempt at building something was simply a beta version of a better future? It takes courage to live that way, to admit that you don't have it all figured out. But that vulnerability is exactly what opens the door to real growth. We've all had moments where things didn't go as planned. You put your heart into a dream and it collapses. You trust someone and they let you down. You try something new and it flops. The emotional weight of those moments can feel unbearable. But underneath that emotion is a hidden message. There's data in the disappointment. There's insight in the embarrassment. And if we pause long enough to examine it instead of escape it, we begin to find the gold. Maybe the dream wasn't aligned with your deeper purpose. Maybe the person you trusted wasn't meant to go with you to the next level. Maybe the failure happened because you were playing small, not because you were dreaming too big. We tend to make failure personal. "I failed" quickly becomes "I am a failure." But there's a massive difference between those two. One is an event, the other is an identity, and that's where many of us get stuck. We stop at the failure. We let it label us. But when we separate our identity from the outcome, we reclaim our power. The failure becomes a story, not a sentence, and stories can be rewritten, reinterpreted, reimagined. One of the greatest gifts failure offers is clarity. When something falls apart, we suddenly see what we missed before. We see who showed up and who didn't. We see where we cut corners. We see what mattered most when it was taken away. That clarity is not something we can always gain in success. Success often hides our weak points. Failure exposes them. And while that exposure can sting, it also gives us the exact information we need to grow. It's like a spotlight on the places we need to develop, not to shame us, but to sharpen us. Resilience doesn't come from things going smoothly. It comes from getting back up when they don't. Every comeback story begins with a setback. Every reinvention is preceded by a breakdown. Every breakthrough demands a breakdown first. We want the outcome without the process, but it's the process that makes us capable of handling the outcome. If you want to become someone who can hold success with humility and strength, you have to be willing to wrestle with failure without losing your identity in it. There's an urgency here, too, because the longer you avoid failure, the longer you delay growth. Perfectionism is just procrastination in disguise. It's fear pretending to be control. But real control comes when you stop avoiding the fall and start embracing the feedback. Because the truth is, failure is one of the few things in life that's guaranteed. You will fail, you will fall. But how you respond in those moments, how you mine them for meaning, how you ask better questions, how you reframe the narrative determines not just what you achieve, but who you become. Patterns of success often wear the disguise of defeat. It's one of the most paradoxical truths in the human experience. The very moments that seem to break us are often the ones building us, but we rarely recognize that in real time. Instead, we feel the sting, the embarrassment, the ache of something not going as planned, and we assume it was a waste. We mourn what didn't work, we question our worth, we sometimes even give up altogether. But if you zoom out, if you look at the full picture rather than the painful snapshot, you begin to see a pattern emerge. A pattern that only becomes visible through reflection, time, and the courage to look beneath the surface. It's easy to celebrate the peaks, to spotlight the wins, to show off the polished version of a journey. That's what people usually see. But the path to those victories often runs straight through rejection, heartbreak, loss, confusion, and moments of deep uncertainty. What's more interesting is that these defeats aren't detours, they're woven directly into the success story. They are the very terrain that shapes the mindset, skills, and grit required to sustain achievement. The challenge is, these moments don't come with a sign that says, necessary growth in progress. They come dressed in frustration, failure, and fear. And if you don't know how to look past the disguise, you'll miss the entire point of the experience. Think of the entrepreneur who launches a product that completely flops. To the outside world, it looks like a failure, an idea that didn't land, money lost, time wasted. But what the world doesn't see is how that defeat taught her how to listen better, how to improve her pitch, how to identify real demand. The second time she launches something, it succeeds not because she's suddenly brilliant, but because she allowed her defeat to become her mentor. That's the pattern. It was always there, but it wore the face of disappointment first. Life doesn't hand out growth neatly labeled. It throws it at you when you least expect it, and the way you respond defines everything. The athlete who loses a championship game and trains harder than ever, the student who fails an exam and finally discovers how to study effectively, the artist whose work is rejected until they find their authentic voice, all of them are being guided by a pattern they can't fully see yet. It's not until much later that they realize every setback was secretly aligning them with something better. The disguise of defeat is clever like that. It forces you to feel your way forward, to trust a process you can't fully predict, and to become someone worthy of the very success you're chasing. There's something uniquely human about misinterpreting the middle of the story as the end. We face a loss and decide that's the conclusion. But every good story has conflict. Every hero faces a low point. It's built into the narrative because it's in the struggle that transformation happens. The irony is, the very defeat we try to run from is usually the exact moment that contains the wisdom, the lesson, or the redirection we needed most. But we're often too distracted by the disappointment to realize what's being gifted to us through the pain. Sometimes the disguise is so convincing that we spend years trying to avoid similar situations again. We treat that failure as a warning instead of a doorway. But if we can shift our view, if we can see defeat not as evidence that we're off course, but as proof that we're in the process of becoming, then we start to uncover the real value buried in those moments. We begin to understand that the loss wasn't pointless, it was preparation. It was shaping us into someone who could handle what comes next with greater wisdom, resilience, and depth. Patterns of success aren't always logical. They often require setbacks that appear senseless until you're far enough down the road to look back and see how the pieces connected. There's an art to trusting that what feels like a step backward might actually be the leverage needed for a giant leap forward. It's a discipline to not flinch when defeat knocks at the door. Because sometimes defeat is just destiny in disguise, checking to see if you're serious enough to keep going. We're so quick to label events as good or bad, as wins or losses, but growth doesn't follow such neat categories. Some of your most pivotal breakthroughs will come dressed as the moments you wanted to quit. And that's why awareness is everything. Awareness of the bigger picture. Awareness that patterns of success are unfolding all the time, even when they feel like failure, especially when they feel like failure. The world rarely tells you when you're on the right path, it just tests you to see if you'll stay on it. The people who go on to do something meaningful in this world aren't the ones who avoided defeat. They're the ones who kept showing up after it. Not because they enjoyed the pain, but because they understood that sometimes the disguise is necessary. Sometimes the struggle is sacred. Sometimes the exact moment you think you've lost everything is the moment you're being led to what you truly need. The emotional aftermath of failure reveals hidden strengths. In the raw silence that follows a setback, when the noise of ambition is replaced by doubt and disappointment, something powerful begins to stir. It's not immediate. At first, there's just the ache, shame, frustration, maybe even anger. You replay the moment over and over, wondering what you could have done differently, asking questions that have no clear answers. You feel small, exposed, vulnerable, and yet, in the middle of that emotional storm, something else begins to form beneath the surface, a quiet realization, a spark of clarity, a subtle but profound shift in who you are and what you're made of. Failure doesn't just bruise the ego, it challenges the very foundation of your identity. That's why it hurts so much. It forces you to confront the gap between who you thought you were and who reality shows you to be. But that confrontation, as painful as it is, holds the key to real transformation. Because once the illusion shatters, once the roles and expectations fall away, you're left with something real. Not what you project to the world, but what remains when everything else is stripped down. And what remains is often far stronger than you imagined. The emotional weight of failure can be crushing. It drags you into questions about your worth, your ability, your future. But buried inside that heaviness is a resilience that doesn't surface during easy times. It's only when your confidence is cracked open that you begin to see the deeper layers of your character. You learn how to endure discomfort, how to navigate uncertainty, how to sit with pain without letting it define you. These are not surface-level skills. They are foundational qualities that turn ambition into purpose and purpose into impact. When everything goes right, you rarely have a reason to look inward. Success, while validating, can also be deceptive. It hides your blind spots. It reinforces habits that may not serve you in the long run. But failure exposes everything. And while that exposure can feel like humiliation, it's actually a gift. Because once you see what's broken, you can fix it. Once you acknowledge the weakness, you can begin to build strength. And often, the strength you discover isn't just functional, it's emotional, spiritual, deeply personal. It's the kind of strength that makes you more human, more grounded, more compassionate toward yourself and others. One of the most underestimated byproducts of failure is self-awareness. You start to notice the inner voice that's always been there, but never had your full attention. The voice that tells you whether you're chasing the right dream or just doing what's expected. The voice that reminds you of your values when everything external seems unstable. That internal clarity doesn't come through applause or praise. It comes when you're forced to listen to yourself because no one else is clapping. And once you've heard that voice, once you've connected with that deeper part of yourself, it's almost impossible to ignore it again. There's also a kind of courage that rises after failure, not the loud, performative kind. It's quieter, more enduring. It's the courage to try again, not because you're guaranteed success, but because you now understand that failure isn't fatal. You've survived it. You've felt the worst of it. And somehow you're still standing. That realization becomes a turning point. You stop fearing failure the same way. You begin to see it as a teacher, even a companion. And with that shift, your actions change. You take risks not recklessly, but with wisdom. You move forward not with blind optimism, but with a deeper confidence that comes from having fallen and risen before. There's something profoundly human about this process. We break and we rebuild. We lose and we learn. And in the middle of it all, we discover parts of ourselves that only reveal themselves under pressure. Strength isn't born in comfort, it's revealed in crisis. And the emotional aftermath of failure is the crucible where that revelation takes place. You may not feel strong in the moment. You may feel broken, lost, uncertain. But if you stay with it, if you allow yourself to feel it, reflect on it, grow through it, you'll find that something solid has been forged in the fire. People often talk about bouncing back, as if returning to where you were before is the goal. But real growth means you don't just bounce back, you rise higher. You carry with you the scars, yes, but also the insights, the humility, the perspective, the depth. And with that comes a strength that can't be measured by titles or numbers. It's measured by how you show up in the face of difficulty, by how you support others through their own struggles, by how unshakable you become when life throws the next unexpected turn. Because it will. But now you're different. You've seen your own strength in the ruins. You found something in the silence, something that was always there, waiting for the moment you'd be still enough, broken enough, real enough to notice it. Unnoticed failures are the training grounds for unstoppable resilience. These are the quiet missteps that happen away from the spotlight, the private losses no one claps for, the stumbles that don't make headlines or trigger sympathy. They often slip through the cracks of our attention because they don't appear dramatic enough to matter. But in reality, they are the invisible chisels that shape character, the silent drills that build mental toughness, and the hidden tests that prepare us for battles we've yet to face. Most people focus only on the big, visible failures, the ones that are loud, humiliating, or public. But it's the unnoticed ones, the subtle disappointments, and everyday defeats that lay the groundwork for true resilience. These failures often show up in the form of small rejections, an ignored message, a missed opportunity, a goal that quietly slips through your fingers despite your best effort. No one else sees the weight you carry in those moments. No one congratulates you for trying, and yet you pick yourself up, adjust your mindset, and move forward. That internal recovery process may not be celebrated, but it's powerful. Every time you rise without recognition, your resilience grows. You're not just learning how to survive disappointment, you're learning how to self-regulate, how to motivate yourself when no one is watching, how to hold your vision steady even when the road is filled with fog. The beauty of unnoticed failure is that it doesn't destroy your ego in one dramatic blow, it wears it down gently, making space for humility, reflection, and authentic strength. When you fail without an audience, you have a rare opportunity to be honest with yourself. There's no pressure to save face, no expectation to perform. You're free to be raw, to admit what hurt, to analyze what went wrong, and to grow from it without judgment. That's where resilience is born, not from perfection, but from repetition. From falling down and getting back up again and again, with no applause, no validation, just a quiet internal fire that refuses to be put out. This type of failure teaches you patience. In a world obsessed with instant success, unnoticed failures stretch your timeline. They force you to slow down, to build a longer game. You realize that progress isn't always visible and that growth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes the most important lessons are unfolding in the shadows. You start to trust the process, not because it's glamorous, but because you've seen how it works in your own life. You've experienced the way small losses turn into big revelations, the way persistence slowly turns pain into power. And that trust becomes your advantage. It becomes the foundation of resilience that doesn't shake when things go wrong. Another gift of unnoticed failures is adaptability. Every time you face a silent setback, you make small but significant shifts. You tweak your strategy, adjust your mindset, try something different. Over time, these micro adjustments compound. They sharpen your instincts. They make you more flexible, more aware, more agile in the face of change. And while the world may only notice you once you succeed, what they won't see is the thousands of quiet moments that prepared you. They won't see the late nights filled with self-doubt, the quiet tears, the journal pages full of failed attempts and stubborn hope. But you'll know, and that knowing is a kind of armor. It shields you from the illusion of overnight success and grounds you in the truth of your own journey. There is a special kind of confidence that grows when you build resilience in the dark. It's not loud or boastful, it's calm, steady, unshakable. Because you've been through the invisible battles, you've learned how to bounce back without a safety net. You've trained in the shadows so that when the spotlight finally hits you, you're not performing, you're simply continuing what you've already mastered in silence. That's what makes you unstoppable. Not that you've never failed, but that you've failed often and risen quietly, each time stronger than before. Many people fear failure because they think it will break them. But unnoticed failures prove the opposite. They become quiet proof that you are far more durable than you realized. Each one is a reminder that you've been here before, that you've felt the sting and still chosen to keep going. You've learned to absorb pain without turning bitter. You've trained your mind to find lessons where others find defeat. You've conditioned your spirit to respond to adversity with grit instead of surrender. That conditioning doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time in the trenches of effort no one acknowledges, in the moments you feel invisible but refuse to stop. The irony is that by the time the world sees your success, they often assume it came easily. They won't understand the resilience that was forged in silence, the hours of trying, failing, adjusting, and trying again. But you will, and that knowledge becomes a quiet strength you carry everywhere. Not because you crave recognition, but because you've earned your power in places no one else bothered to look.